Welcome back, welcome back. In recent weeks, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian National Authority, Salam Fayyad, has been heavily involved in meetings with the Israelis, the Americans, and the Quartet to try to meet the end-of-the-year deadline for a settlement hoped for and called for by George W. Bush. But we began at the beginning. Prime Minister, Israel is about to celebrate its 60th anniversary, and their word obviously would be celebrate. But presumably for most Palestinians, May the 14th, 1948, turned out to be a disaster.
It's not for most Palestinians, it's for all Palestinians, actually. Israel, yes, is about to celebrate its 60th anniversary establishment of Israel, and we're still looking for our state. That's what needs to happen, as a matter of fact, and I believe that Palestinians are all on the same page insofar as this particular issue is concerned.
All on the same page?
Absolutely.
Obviously, one organization that's not on the same page is Hamas, but presumably there can never be a final settlement without Hamas. But how does Hamas get involved in these negotiations, given Israel's stance, etc.?
Negotiations can be handled and should be handled in accordance with our political system by the PLO, which is the sole legitimate representative of Palestinian people. Negotiations indeed can proceed, and they are proceeding. There are negotiations right now. Indeed, as we speak, there are negotiations going on. And what is it that we're looking for after all? We've been dispossessed. We're looking for a state of our own. We're looking to enjoy that which is considered to be an absolute right for all peoples around the world, to live as free people in a state of our own. How can there be any Palestinian who would take issue with that? I don't think there is.
And I mean, you have a situation now, of course, where, in fact, President George W. Bush would like to see the establishment of a Palestinian state by the end of his regime, by the end of the year. That does not sound really time enough. And is there a danger that there'll end up being a three-state solution? Gaza, West Bank, Israel.
I hope that will never happen. You know, when I say we're looking for a homeland of our own, for a state of our own, that has to include Gaza for sure. The state we're looking for is a state that is to be established on the territory that was occupied in 1967. That was a choice that we have made, and these are the commitments we entered into, and we're looking for implementation of that vision. Now, you're right in terms of what you said about there does not appear to be enough time in what remains in 2008 to realize the objectives set forth at the Annapolis conference, when it was said that the conflict was going to be settled in the course of this year, occupation was going to end, and the Palestinian state was to emerge. Is it possible? I would say yes, it is possible. Why? Because the political process is about negotiating so-called permanent status issues. Is there the will to actually get on with it and do that? That takes us to the other, I think, more proper question to ask, which is it likely to happen this year? And I would say no. It is not likely, given especially what has happened since Annapolis. Annapolis happened last November. And it was then said that the solution was going to happen in the course of this year. But look at what has happened since then. Annapolis was about setting in motion two tracks. One was the political process, meaning negotiations of final status issues. The other was, or related to, the need to immediately implement roadmap obligations, phase one. On the Israeli side, these include such things, important elements like freeze on all settlement activity. Look at what happened since then.
And you said that things have been crumbling. One of the words you used. So what, in terms of that list of things that needs to be done to deal with the roadmap and to reach the point of a Palestinian state, what is the most urgent thing that is not being done at the moment?
Roadmap obligations so far as settlement activity are very clear. The language there says complete settlement freeze. Complete settlement freeze, that's what it says. Now that says not one more break. It does not say that you can make an exception here or another there, under whatever pretext. If you look at what happened since Annapolis, actually, if anything, pace of settlement activity has picked up. It did not stop. It did not slow down. It has actually picked up. I can tell you in numbers. For example, since Annapolis, 747 settlement housing units were tendered. In the 11-month period before Annapolis, 138 units were tendered. Something is wrong here. Why is it so difficult to say you accepted this commitment? Actually going back to the spring of 2003, not only to Annapolis. Why is it so difficult to really actually, put an end to this?
Well, you were saying, why is it so difficult?
Yes.
I mean, is the reason that it's so difficult that Israel is not of a mind or of a nature to embrace any major concessions?
I think the issue is often referred to in those terms, concessions. It's been accepted for a while now that for there to be a lasting solution to this conflict, a Palestinian state should emerge, should be established on the territory occupied in 1967. That paradigm shift took place at some point in time. I would say since 2002, things changed. And they changed, in fact, specifically, with the statement made by George W. Bush when he said that the occupation that began 1967 should end and Palestinian state should emerge. That's not all he said then. He said other things. He said that we Palestinians should do a number of things in order to qualify, so to speak, for statehood, something which one might take issue with on the grounds of, well, freedom, the right to freedom is something that ought to be looked at as an absolute right of nations. Nevertheless, that's another issue, we can talk about that. But he did say that occupation that began 1967 should end, Palestinian state should emerge. First sitting president to say that. The issue, our cause then became universally accepted or looked at as one of occupation. It was not the case all along. That was not the case all along. That was a major threshold, I think.
But I mean, Israel would never agree to an unfettered right to return, would they?
Well, these are the issues that were deferred. One of the issues deferred for consideration at the time of concluding final status agreement. There is no disputing the fact that Palestinians were dispossessed and displaced at the time in 1948. There's no question about that. That right is granted under international law.
Do you really think it's realistic, Prime Minister, to expect a Palestinian state to exist? We've said this year is not long enough, but I mean, in 20 years' time, do you think these problems will have been resolved and there will be a Palestinian state, or will the problems still exist? Second thing is, would a Palestinian state and an Israeli state be able to work together? The second one, I can see there could be yes to the second half of that, but the first half of getting a Palestinian state looks more problematical, as you said, now than at Annapolis.
Yes, and I think unless something is done to arrest the deterioration, to stop doing harm, so to speak, to the prospects of emergence of Palestinian state, I'm afraid, yes, we're moving further and further away from that resolution. Occupation has been there for nearly 41 years now, since 1967, quite a long time. I remember growing up in the late 50s, early 60s as a child, and by the time 1967 happened, it was hardly almost like 19 years since establishment of the State of Israel. Now we're 41 years since occupation, much longer period of time. So yes, unless there is renewed effort and serious effort exerted toward bringing this conflict to an end, in accord and in line with this doctrine, I'm afraid everyone would stand to lose. We certainly would miss our shot at living, enjoying that which is considered to be right by all people, for all people around the world, to live as free people in a country of our own. Israel would still have problems, for certain, to deal with. and the whole world community, which has been interested in this issue for a long time, would certainly have to continue to worry about the consequences of this conflict going on unresolved. So this is the time to really actually call it as it is. We just can't let things go on like this much longer on the premise that there is a political process going on, when in fact what's going on is something that is completely at odds with the need to impart credibility to that process. With each brick, built on settlements or in the area of settlement activity, the political process's credibility erodes further, and the political process is being stripped of any meaningful content with those actions. That has to stop. This is a reality.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for this conversation.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it.
Salam Fayyad there, the Prime Minister of the Palestine National Authority. After the break, an exclusive interview with Tony Blair on his vital role as the quartet's Middle East envoy. In just a moment.